Hello, I am on. Recording. Okay, can you hear me, Barb?
Yep.
Okay. My name is Tom Stamen, and I am the University Archivist at St. Cloud State University. Today's date is March 8th, 2017. I am in the KVSC studios with alum, former faculty member, administrator, Barb Grachek. How are you today, Barb?
Very good.
Thank you very much for agreeing to come down here and talking to me for a while about, let's say, your career at St. Cloud State University. It was a very long and illustrious career. I know you had many different roles here that I'm really curious to learn more about. So let's start with your birth date and who your parents were.
February 10th, 1941 is my birth date, and my parents' names were Anne and Melvin Svela.
Svela.
Good German and Norwegian.
And you grew up where?
Well, I was born in Moorhead, Minnesota, raised in Fargo, North Dakota. And when I was a sophomore in high school, my dad got transferred from a position in super value stores from Fargo. He was everything from a warehouseman to a truck driver to Department of Transportation activities. And he got transferred to super value in Hopkins. So that's where I finished off my high school.
So when did you move to Hopkins? When did your family move to Hopkins? Do you remember?
I was a sophomore in high school.
Sophomore in high school. Mm-hmm. So you graduated high school in
1958.
1958. Yeah. So it was like 55, 56.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't know you were from North Dakota.
Oh, yes.
And I understand now why you moved to Hopkins. Super Value is located there.
That's right.
Interesting. So you graduate from high school. What did you decide to do? Did you know I'm going to college, or how did you decide if you're going to college, and how did you decide to come to St. Cloud State University? So I can imagine in the late 50s, it wasn't as easy to get to St. Cloud as it is today. Why St. Cloud? So why college and why St. Cloud?
Well, it's kind of convoluted statement. Neither of my parents graduated from 8th grade, and so education was very important to them. However, we didn't have a lot of money. And so first I enrolled at St. Cloud State and didn't hear anything. We were looking at public schools because there wasn't any way that we were going to go to any place else. And I didn't hear anything from St. Cloud at the time, so I also enrolled at Moorhead State. And my mother had been a house cleaner through her years. And we stopped in Moorhead one day, she and I, and we stopped at the place where she had cleaned homes. And they said, "Oh, wouldn't it be nice if Barbara went to school here at Moorhead and she could take care of our children?" We got in the car, we were driving back to Hopkins, and we stopped at St. Cloud because my mother said, "You're not going to do the same thing as I did." And so that's how I stopped at St. Cloud on our way home from North Dakota. To Minnesota. And they had, in St. Cloud State, they had my records. The rooms were mostly filled. So they said, "We've got a room for you in Whitney House. It's a women's residence hall." It all happened just because it was there, and that's what you did. You didn't ask questions. So I moved into Whitney House for my freshman year. I had 8 of us that lived in one room with 4 sets of bunks. Next to it was another room with 3 sets of bunks. That was 14 of us that shared one bathroom. So we used to always say we had one in, one on, and one at. And the first night, they get you out of bed and bring you down to the living room to get you orientated as a freshman. And there's a man in our house. And he's sitting in the living room while I find out that he is a faculty member at St. Cloud State by the name of Alan Dull. He's a math teacher, and he was quote unquote, the house father because his wife was the house mother. So that's how I started at St. Cloud State. Registered my first quarter, had 18 credits.
That's a lot of credits.
Quarter credits.
Yeah.
Started with enrolling in 16. 2 of them were 5-credit courses and so forth. But I got in line to do my physical, and they were asking me my majors, and I said business and Phi Ed, and they said, oh, you have Phi Ed, black and black. I said, no, I don't. Oh, you need those 2. So back in line I went, added 2 more credits to my program. I had 18 credits my first quarter, looking for a job because I had to pay for my schooling. And first found a job downtown in which I had to run back and forth twice a day to work on this job. And then I got a job as a clerical. We didn't use the word student worker, but as a clerical in the Department of Industrial Arts, paying me 75 cents an hour. So I started there, and one day the chair of the department came to me and he said, well, we're going to get real help in this office, so we don't need you anymore. And, one that didn't have a lot at that point was a little nervous about what she was going to do. And another faculty member in that department walked out towards the end of the day and he said, see me before you leave. And I walked in to see a faculty member by the name of D. Detra. His name really was Guido, but it was D. Detra. And I went in to see him and he said, we're going to be opening a print shop shortly, and I want you to work there. In the meantime, you go over to the Learning Resources Department, and Luther Brown, who is the director of that area, will have a job for you. So I went to see Luther, got a job to organize, buying all of the books from the authors of the state of Minnesota to start our collection. So I worked there until print shop moved into the lower level of Stewart Hall. Started working there, got a raise, and I worked for $1 an hour. And I worked at the print shop through all 4 then remaining years, and in addition had a resident assistant's job, what we called at that time a dormitory resident, for the remainder of my years to pay my dormitory fees.
And did you do that at Whitney House, or
Yes,
was it another one?
That was at Whitney House.
So you lived at Whitney House all 4 years that you were. Well, I know as an undergraduate.
Yeah, as an undergraduate. With the exception of 1 quarter, I went to student teaching, and the next quarter it wasn't available because we had hired another assistant director, and so that year I lived in the sewing room.
At Whitney House?
At Whitney House.
That's a great story. So, what was it like living in Whitney House? I mean, it's been now an administrative building. I mean, it's a house, and they've divided into offices. Mm-hmm. But it's been like that for 50 years. I mean, I when I saw that I knew you had lived in Whitney House, and mm-hmm. I don't know. Is it strange to see it as sort of as a place that people work at, as opposed to people living in? Or you don't have those kind of feelings anymore? I don't have that feelings anymore.
There were 40 of us women that lived in that house.
There's 40 women?
Yeah. We had several, bedrooms from Whitney, and they used the ends of the house, they called it the sun porches. Mm-hmm. And so that's where they added 12 more girls in these sun porches. And living in Whitney did have some advantages, in that you at least knew a group of students. And when you went to eat, at that time we ate almost in where we're sitting now, in Stewart Hall, when you'd go over to the lunchroom to eat, there was always somebody you knew. And so you were never alone. And we grew to be a very close-knit group. I think if we would study now about studying a retention rate, one might look at that kind of a design,
Hmm.
as opposed to all the students now want a single room,
Yeah.
single private bath, so forth. That there was some advantages to having roommates.
Yeah.
But I have to admit that the first night, I can still remember that, the first night I moved into Whitney House, I think I cried
Oh.
because I didn't know where I was and what we were doing and had we done the right thing.
Sounds like you figured that out pretty quickly, though. At least to me, it's funny how you're saying you worked in industrial arts. And here I'm checking off these places that Barb Grachek has worked on campus.
Mm-hmm.
So you got the library,
Mm-hmm.
industrial arts, and then you were here for the start of the print shop.
Yeah.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, the working in industrial arts was because we did not have what we now call the clerical people. There's a union name for it. Ask me.
Ask me.
We didn't have Ask Me, and so the first real help that came in were some of those Ask Me people, and departments started to get secretaries, and so that's where they started that end of it, and students became student workers.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So when you got here, it's interesting how you decided between Moorhead and St. Cloud. But so did you want to be an educator? Did you want to be a teacher at the time? I mean, obviously we weren't far. St. Cloud State wasn't far off from being from home, or being. It was essentially still its primary activity was still training teachers, and that was something that you wanted to do.
Well, again, going back to that time period, for women, for young women, you had your choice. You could be a teacher, you could be a home mother, you could be a daycare provider, you could be a secretary, you could be a nun, you could go to the religious order. There weren't a lot of things, and the clerical. And so initially, before I had applied for St. Cloud State and given our financial resources at that time, I was going to be a secretary. And again, I had a good mother that did a lot of, and I had some good teachers at Hopkins High School. In particular, I had a physical education teacher who became many of our young girls their advisor, and enjoyed those things, and so looked at teaching. So I liked business at that time. I liked physical education, and so when I enrolled here, I took a double major.
And and those stuck too.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, those stuck, and so it just was the business part of it. I took teaching and student taught at Robbinsdale High School. And at the end of when I was getting close to graduation is when the first time that Brendan McDonald, I think it was, showed up in my lifetime. He was the registrar and was looking for graduate assistants to work as advisors in the registrar's office, and knew me because one of the other things that you did, it was babysit faculty members' kids. And so they'd call over to Whitney House and say, we need a babysitter for such and such a night. Will anybody do it? You did it.
That's how you got to know, that's how you met Brendan McDonald.
Yeah, they lived in the house right next door to Mitchell Hall. And they had two young girls. And yes, I'd go there to babysit. And so that's how I first learned of him. And then he was contacting me about being a graduate assistant.
So that's where you were as Art was telling me yesterday, the program advisor, because I wasn't sure what that meant, and what Art had told me was that it was a graduate assistant, and you would help and advise students in registering for classes.
Yes, that's what we did, and did that for a couple of years. I finished my master's degree, and then they had an opening for, you wouldn't use that word today, we had an opening for the chief program advisor. And Mac, as we called him, hired me for that job. And so that started my role in the registration office.
Because he was the registrar at the time.
Yes, he was a registrar, and then I became, and we had an assistant registrar. And then we had this room in Stewart Hall that was the advising office for registering classes. We had a big IBM tub with class cards in it that we would pull out. And we'd reach across each other and pull these different class cards out to make a schedule. And I don't think it was art. It was one that we had 5 of us. And we'd reach across each other to get these cards, and one of the fellows was reaching across, and I said, if you squeeze my hands in the tub one more time, and everybody in the row standing in line to get registered became quite quiet. And I didn't know what I had said, but it was obviously not quite appropriate. And,
just telling the truth, right, Barb?
But at that time, I became this program advisor, chief program advisor, and then the assistant registrar left. Went to another job in another school, and so I was. We didn't do searches at that time. Mm-hmm. I was promoted, if you want to say, to the assistant registrar, and Bob Wick was the academic dean at that time, and I knew that we would be going to Michigan for Art to go to school. And I thought it would be really nice to be able to get a year of teaching experience so that when we went to Michigan, I could get another job. And the dean of the School of Business said he'd hire me. So I went in to see Dr. Wick. I don't know that we called him doctor, but I went in to see Dr. Wick and said, I'd like to go to the College of Business because I could teach there and get some experience. And Dr. Wick looked at me and he said, I can't do that. And he just said, I can't do that. And but what ended up to do, which happened a lot of times in my career, but I could teach a class. So I went back and had my same job, but also taught a class. Yeah. And that happens a lot in work lives, that you get a job, and if you ask for something else, you get both jobs.
Interesting.
And the reason I always figured that that Dr. Wick didn't want to put me in the College of Business at that time was he didn't have a replacement for me in the registrar's office at that point. So that's why I stayed there.
So you had 2 jobs. So you worked in the registrar's office,
and then just taught one business class,
and then taught a business class. So I know, I have your CV right here. I'm not sure what year this is, Barb, but it says here you were an instructor of business education, office administration, part-time, 67 to 68. Mm-hmm. Courses in accounting, introduction to business communications, consumer economics, and typewriting. Does that sound familiar?
Yeah. I had those at various times during the quarters of that year.
So really, your business degree got you the job to do these things. When I talked to Art yesterday, and he was saying how he had minored in business, and he goes, and that got me my first job, and that was that job at Cathedral. And this is interesting how you had a job, but you got a part-time job to do some of that teaching.
And as a result, later on, when the business also played a role again later on, when I was in international studies, I was able to apply for a teaching position in Denmark and go there.
In 1981, yeah.
And if somebody would have told me when I enrolled at St. Cloud State in 1958 that I one day would go abroad across the ocean, I would have never believed you. Because at that point, we thought a trip from Hopkins to Montana or something like that was really, or go to the farm in North Dakota. Yeah. Those were trips. And never, ever would I have thought that I could get the experiences that I did.
And you went over, just Denmark and Annex several times.
Yeah. And then I was the international programs director, so I was around the country quite a bit negotiating contracts for our international programs.
It's a long way from Fargo, isn't it?
Oh, yeah. No doubt about it. No doubt about it.
So you were teaching. So when did Brendan McDonald leave? Do you remember when he left as registrar? I know he went to Mankato, and then he came back, and then he left again for Nebraska. I didn't look it up. I was trying to remember. I thought it was the mid '60s that he had left. I could be wrong. I'll have to look that up.
Yeah.
But you continued on. If he had left, you were continuing in that position in the registrar's office.
I was going to.
Yeah.
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 But as a result, I had ended up in the academic affairs office at that point. And, he was president in a very difficult time at St. Cloud State. We had a lot of unrest. And again, I can remember the graduation ceremony that was going to be his last action at St. Cloud State. And I said, we were finished giving out the diplomas because he was president, and at that point I was academic vice president. We were done handing out the appointments, and I turned around and says, let's get the hell out of here. And we probably marched out the fastest in any commencement that you've ever seen. It's just the way things are.
Yeah. Did you know he was going to resign before he said it? You knew that?
Yeah.
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 Well, we'll talk about Brendan in just a little bit. I'd wanted to just ask you one more thing about your career as a student here at St. Cloud State. So you majored in physical education,
And
you minored in business, or you
majored
majored in business.
Both of them.
So why did you decide to get a graduate degree? Were you considering maybe teaching? You're obviously going to be teaching. Were you considering a career in higher education or a possibility at some point?
I was teaching, I finished my bachelor's degree, and I had an offer for a teaching job, but I also had the offer for staying on in records and registration. And again, that's where your mother comes in. And her mother says, go finish that master's because you might not have a chance to do that again. So in the old Catholic Church, you learn to obey your parents. And so I obeyed my mother and went to get my master's degree.
Do you regret that?
No.
No.
Not in a minute.
Yeah. It's interesting. It's interesting how you got the master's degree, you had, as a program advisor. Then you stuck around at records and registration, and then you obviously you had met ARDS. So from what he had told me, you guys met at the Newman Center.
Yes.
And you guys got to know each other a little better after as you were graduate students as program advisors.
Yeah, he was a slow learner.
How was he a slow learner?
Well, we had gone to Newman Center for nearly, I suppose, all 4 years. And he even, I don't suppose he told you, he even at a point had dated my roommate. And so, we had been involved in a number of things at Newman. But he really didn't talk to me until we were program advisors. And so that's when we started going to what we called it was called the Teepee, which was a Land O'Lakes ice cream store down on where the Radisson or the River Center is, and they had hot fudge banana sundaes, and the rest is history.
The rest is history. So you two got married in June 1964.
That's correct.
So
D-Day that was. June 6th, D-Day.
June 6th, 1964, so it's easy to remember.
Mm-hmm.
So you're working at the registrar's office. Art was teaching at Cathedral, And I was asking him this yesterday. So he decided that he wanted to go to Wayne State University to get his doctorate in speech communication. So how did that decision come about? Were you open to going, and did you? And I asked him why Wayne State, and he said it was a top program in the country, and it was right for him. What did you think about that decision?
He had an advisor in speech here at St. Cloud that had had gone to Wayne State, and that advisor was now teaching at St. John's. And so the advisor helped him get a job at St. John's so he could have a year of collegiate programming, and that's how he knew about Wayne State. And we went there one summer just to see what it was like, and that's when the riots broke out in Detroit. And
so at that point, Sarah, she was like 6 months old.
6 months old.
Your daughter, Sarah.
Yeah. And fortunately, we had stopped on the way from the airport into Wayne State, and we were going to live in what was the equivalent of a residence hall at Wayne State. And we had stopped to get some food before we got there. When we moved in, the resident director knocked on our door and said, "We never expected it here in Detroit, but there's a riot. Stay in your rooms." And that's the closest to war I've ever experienced, and I hope I never experience it again. Because you'd lay there at night and you'd hear pop, 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 and then you'd hear, and that was the riot stuff, and then the police cleaning out areas. And when we got back to St. Cloud to work at that point, I said, "I'll go to Wayne State with you, but we're not going to live where we lived." And during those times, you just did what was best for whoever. I mean, sometimes it was good for me and sometimes it was good for him. And so we stayed at Wayne State, and he graduate assisted, and I had another kid. And
so Rebecca was born
in Dearborn, Michigan.
In 1970.
Yeah. And I substitute taught in a couple of schools in Detroit. That was the hardest money I ever made in my life. Substitute teaching and teaching 8th grade are not on my resume anymore.
Because it does say, I'm looking at it, so it says substitute teacher, Allen Park and Taylor, Michigan Public Schools, 68 to 70. So that was, I can imagine, it's a lot different than dealing with university students.
Yeah, it was. And dealing with 8th graders that's why young women used to be sent to the nunnery at that point. It was because their mothers couldn't get along with them at home. Truth.
I believe it. So Art's going to school. You had bought a house in Taylor, Michigan, which is a suburb of Detroit.
Yes.
And he was saying that it was his aunt's home.
That's correct.
They had moved to Florida. So Art was going to school. You were substitute teaching and raising your
kids.
2 daughters. So it also says here you were an instructor of business, Wayne County Community College, 69 to 70, courses in accounting and introduction to business.
Yeah. Again, that was part-time adjunct type of employment. You just worked wherever you could. I mean, we've got lots of people here at St. Cloud State that are adjunct.
Yeah.
That's what they do.
And I suppose the money had to come in, right?
Yeah.
Art's learning. You're working, taking care of your children. Yeah. Let's go back to just St. Cloud State. Your time in St. Cloud State in the '60s, just briefly. So Sarah was born in February 1967, and she was telling me this story, and I wanted to know if it was true or not. So Sarah was born on what, a Saturday, a Friday?
A Friday. Right. No, a Saturday.
A Saturday.
Saturday, I think it was. Yes.
And you came back from the hospital
Mm-hmm.
a day or two later.
Mm-hmm.
She said that you went back to work
Mm-hmm.
just a few days after that she was born. Is that true?
Yeah, well, we needed to have some program things proofread, etc. And so I was in the hospital and I was proofreading what we needed to have done, and the doctor came in and said, kind of what you were doing. And at that time, we used to stay in the hospital for a week, and I don't quite know why we did. But he said, well, as long as you're doing that, you might as well go home. So he kicked me out. I was also at that time taking a German course. And so I went back to class.
Oh, man.
I was fortunate again to have a young woman who wanted some employment, but outside the home. And so she came to our house and took care of Sarah. Now that makes it easier as
Yes.
well.
Yeah, you wouldn't be able to be doing anything with a newborn child. Yeah.
So things fell in place.
She was telling me that story, and I was just chuckling. So I didn't mean to lead you on, but I thought it was a funny story. She goes, and Mom says it's true. So.
Yeah. One of the other jobs that I had during that 1960s and early 70s was a very interesting program with Donald Sicking, Dr. Donald Sicking. He wrote a grant and got money from the federal government to study post-secondary education. At that time, we had very prescribed general education programs. You had to take English 1, English 2, da-da-da-da. And so he and he was the instrumental in starting it, but he hired me as his research director. And we worked on giving a student the right to take any 192 credits they wanted.
So this is the elective studies piece, yeah.
And we called it self-select at that time. And you could take any 192 credits you wanted. And we'd give you a bachelor's degree, Bachelor of Elective Studies it was called. And that's what led to what we have now as a BES.
I'd never heard of it until I came to school here. When I started here 10 years ago, I had no idea. Someone was describing the program to me. I had no idea something like that even existed.
Mm-hmm.
So you were working with Don Sicking, and I was asking Art this, and was it expected that you were going to be back to St. Cloud, or was that just happened how it worked out?
Yeah, how it worked out. He got a job offer here, and we were most happy to get back with family, and so he got the job in the speech department, and then I started working on these other jobs. Yeah.
So he started it was fall 71, and then I assume you started soon after that. So, and you knew Don from before when you were a student here, and you must have had some contact with Don while you were a student or working in the registrar's office.
Not in the I suppose some of that, because he was the dean of the College of Liberal Arts and Sciences, and so I, again, from the registrar's office, you worked with any variety of faculty and administrators. So
you worked with. So how long were you working with Don to do that? So that was, as I'm looking at your CV, Barb, it was
4 or 5 years.
Yeah, it says here 72 to 76 that you worked for him. So, so when you left in 76, the grant was up, or the program was successful, and you decided that
it proceeded on. It was kept in the curriculum, and so the funds ran out. The federal funds ran out, but we accomplished what we intended to accomplish.
And quite successfully.
And faculty supported it. Again, it's one of those things in administration, and if Congress could do the same thing, we might get some things done. But Donald Sicking was very instrumental with the faculty. I mean, he was a faculty member. He was the union representative at one time. He was president of the Faculty Association. Worked very well. with his colleagues. And so when he presented this BES to the faculty senate, I mean, he had several votes in his pocket before we got to the senate, and that makes a difference.
Wow. I was talking to another retired faculty member, and we were talking about Don Sickick, and he said that he's never ever heard anyone speak badly of Don ever, and he goes, and that's the truth. And I've met Don just briefly, and he was a very nice man, and I'm glad that you must have enjoyed working for him. And and it's funny, you got something done, right?
Yes.
That's still around today.
Well, and it showed that faculty can work, with each other. There's no question about it.
You wondered about that today, right?
Yeah, you do.
Faculty working with each other and working with the administration. It's frustrating to see that, and I know you saw it firsthand. So working with Don, you moved on. What did you do after working with Don Sicking with elective studies?
Then I was associate dean in liberal arts and sciences, and at that point, I believe Louise Johnson moved into that.
That sounds about right.
Position. And so I worked there, and then I became the Affirmative Action Officer and the Title IX Coordinator.
And that was new to campus, and I think that was new all over the country, as I'm trying to remember. So how did you get interested in doing that? Or did they ask you to do it?
They just asked me to do it. So you do it.
And you were the Affirmative Action Officer until 1984.
A long time.
So were you the Affirmative Action Officer with you had other things that were going on too?
Yeah,
so
other duties. Yeah, and Title IX was new at that time as well, which was equal opportunities for men and women, and we particularly worked on athletics. Yeah. At that time.
So you were dealing. Did the hiring process change because of affirmative action and Title IX as well?
Yeah.
So it wasn't, as you were just saying a few minutes ago, how somebody left and you were promoted.
Yeah.
And so that process was changing at that time.
Yeah.
Yeah. So did you enjoy doing that? Did you see a lot of change in those 7 years?
Oh, we saw quite a bit of, putting things in order and process. But there's some things in there that to this day don't work. We still have to fight for opportunities for women, for minorities. There's a lot of work that could be done. And I said, I would have put myself as a success if I could have worked my way out of that job, that it wasn't needed. And I can't say I did.
Yeah.
So I wasn't successful.
But you certainly set the road up for it to be successful. I know what you're saying about we don't need these anymore, but we need that. Yeah, they have somebody doing that. So you were doing affirmative action. You were also, as I'm looking at your CV, and I'm sorry I have your CV here because you did so many different things. The next thing you listed is acting assistant to the vice president for administrative affairs part-time in 1978, and then you were assistant vice president for academic affairs from 1977, and you were obviously in academic affairs for a very long time. What kind of, besides the affirmative action and the Title IX activities, what did you do as an assistant or associate vice president in academic affairs?
That's when we started rostering positions, doing a lot of financial elements with it, keeping track of budgets. That's where, when we get into this budget cuts, I know who's tenured and who isn't tenured and how much everything costs. Well, again, I put a lot of things in order for the vice president. The vice president was in charge of promotions. So there were a number of things with promotions and what we called Article 22s, and getting those in order for the vice president to handle. It was one of those job descriptions that it's here, and then you get down to job description number 11, and it says, any and all other duties assigned.
I always describe you as the problem solver.
Some would define me as the problem maker.
Problem. It's always what's always interesting about your career to me, Barb, is how you did so many of these different kinds of jobs, and my guess is that you were really good at what you had done, and there was an issue somewhere that let's plug Barb Grachek into that. We need an acting for this. Let's plug Barb into that job. I mean, you were acting vice president for academic affairs on 2 occasions, and then obviously after the last one, you were the permanent position for 5 years. So I guess to me that's how I often see your role at the university. So I don't know if that's correct or not, but
I appreciate it. But I always thought it was because they didn't know what to do with me, and so they filled me in someplace. And there were a couple of times that kind of happened in a way. Yeah. You know, the director of the International Studies program, that kind of fell in because somebody had left, and they needed somebody to make it run. And I had some experience in it.
Right, because that was part of academic affairs at the time, so you obviously knew something about it.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And I had taught a couple of times on programs, so at least I knew where the ocean was and how to get on the airplane.
Just tell me where to go.
Yeah.
If it's Denmark or Anik or somewhere.
I've got a visa. A visa will travel.
Well, let me back up for just a second. We'll get back to your St. Cloud State career in just a second. So in 1978, you earned your Ph.D. at the University of Minnesota. What made you decide to get a Ph.D. in? I have it here. I have to remember.
1978, I think.
Yeah. I don't remember what it was in. It was what was it? Higher education.
Higher education. Yeah.
So what made you decide that you wanted to do that, and why the University of Minnesota? And it's funny. What Sarah had told me. So your daughter Sarah, and I had asked her the same question, and she said that all she remembers was you downstairs typing, and her dad saying, "Just leave Mom alone for a while." But that's all she knew about it. So why did you decide to get your Ph.D.?
Well, there were, again, with women, we needed some support for each other. And there were three women at the time who had started going to the University of Minnesota, commuting back and forth from St. Cloud once a week, either one evening or on Saturday. And they took a takeoff of, at that point, sororities and fraternities and the likes. And so we decided to organize a sorority, and we called ourselves the Gamma Delta Iotas. And what that meant was GDI, and one might know what GDI stands for, but I'm not going to say. And it was after there was one black woman and 2 white women that started this group, and so we used a takeoff of some of that. Our mascot was a panda bear. Our food was an Oreo cookie. Just we didn't go on retreats like men did. We went on advances. Just a bunch of, but it kept us together as a group. And so Bert and I talked. We never did anything individually per se without the other one kind of knowing what they were doing. But we talked about it some, and because it would mean him taking care of the kids some. And so we decided, I'd go down with these others and we'd give it a try and so forth. It worked out fine. A couple of the things that worked out very well was the children knew their dad could read, because when he was in school, I was their caregiver, and he was gone many nights. And so I read them their stories and put them to bed and so forth. And then they also found out that Daddy could cook because, again, I was gone some, and macaroni and cheese wasn't quite enough for cereal, wasn't quite enough for them to eat. And so he learned how to cook as well. And so there were trade-offs on all of these things. So I went to school on Saturdays and one night a week, sometimes 2 nights a week, and commuted, finished the degree.
Do you remember what year you started that program?
Oh, about 1975, I think.
75, so it took you 3 years.
Took me 3 years.
But then you also wrote your dissertation and got all that. That must have been your typing downstairs that Sarah was mentioning.
Well, it also was typing somebody else's.
Wouldn't be something of arts.
Yeah, typing somebody else's. And at one time, he mailed one of his dissertation things back to his advisor, and it didn't show up, but eventually did. And Sarah must remember that too, because Daddy lost his dissertation in the mail.
Oh God, that doesn't happen anymore, I guess. So 1978, you finished, and so you created this informal sorority with a few other folks here on campus. And did you have an ultimate goal? I mean, I understand the unity, but you got it, and then then what?
The ultimate thing was you wrote job descriptions for everybody and so forth. Having a Ph.D. bought you other opportunities to do things. I mean, was I going to stay, for example, as affirmative action officer for the rest of my life? Well, maybe not. But if I had a doctoral, and if Art decided to move someplace else too, or it gave us both an opportunity to move to some other areas, it was a selling item, and so you bought the next product.
Right. I mean, that's what you have to do, and it's just smart to do, and I can see how that it's staying on campus. At least maybe it's my impression. So, oh well, she's got a PhD. She must know what she's talking about.
But no, it was a job requirement, and if you didn't have that on your resume, it was immediately set aside.
Right.
The whole idea of being being associate dean, the director of, and so forth.
Yeah.
Having the PhD was a plus.
So you had mentioned travel, and we're not going to talk about travel yet, but as I always think about as you were saying, you never thought in a million years you'd travel overseas. So you have the PhD, you're in the academic affairs office, and you are one of the first female vice president. So you were, was it 82, 83, 84? You were acting academic vice president.
Mm-hmm.
Was that something that you ever imagined that you would do?
Never. I was going to be a gym teacher.
At Robbinsdale High School in Robbinsdale, Minnesota.
Yeah, that's what I was going to do. So, I'm jumping ahead of you for the international studies thing. When the Denmark thing came open, I applied for that one. Well, we both applied for it, and again, from the standpoint of what they needed, they selected me. And it was, well, but Art's not going to go. And I said, that's all right, what we're going to do. And Art stayed home with the kids. I went to Denmark. It was a split quarter. And so at Christmas time, he packed up the girls, came over to Denmark. Girls stayed with me the rest of the quarter.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and he went back to St. Cloud.
He had to come back and teach,
finish off his quarter. But again, it worked.
Did you enjoy Denmark?
Oh yes, very well, and the girls did too. We were there were 3 of us as faculty that taught over there. All 3 of us had families with us, so my girls, played with or went to, kind of things with their kids. And the only thing that Sarah probably mentioned to you was when they took the boat, as I called it. We're not like Donald Trump. We had to take the least expensive trip, and so we went over by boat from England to Denmark. And when the kids went over with their daddy, they got sick, and or no, I got sick.
You got sick.
I got sick, and so when they were coming, I said, "This isn't the Love Boat. Make sure they have some Dramamine with them." And so then they came over with something in their belly so that they wouldn't get sick.
Art was telling me, he told me about that trip. He's like, we had to fly to Gatwick, and he was telling me we would take a train and then a boat, and then he was telling me all these things, and he goes, and I told him, I said, must have been pretty memorable. You didn't forget. And he's like, it was, and he said the exact thing that you did, that you took the cheapest way over there, and it was an adventure. It was a long day.
Yeah, it was. And when I was there, and I don't know if he remembered that part, when I was going over on the boat in the middle of the night, I had taken a couple of quarters of Danish so I could at least say hello and goodbye and so forth. I was laying in this bunk bed hanging on as we were going across the sea, and they announced something in Danish, and I understood enough of the Danish that I knew what they said, and it was, due to the rough seas last night, we were only able to maintain our course. We will now dock at, 1800 instead of it was supposed to be at 1200. I thought, well, I can't lay in this bed much longer. I do have to get up and go potty. So, but for at least 2 weeks after we got there, when you'd lay down at night in your bed, it would rock, just like a plane.
But besides your trip there, it was a good experience.
Oh yes, yeah. I would and I used to with the kids here, the students here, recommend that they take something.
Yeah. And you were at Alnwick too, in I believe it was, as Sarah was telling, was 86, 87. You and Art both went to Alnwick at that time.
Yep.
And you both taught? You taught as well, Barb?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And then he directed a program later than that, I believe, too.
It's 97, 98.
Yeah.
Is that after you
And
retired, or after you left as academic VP?
Yeah, I got a sabbatical. So I went on sabbatical and went to Alnwick.
And did you teach at that time too, or were you there
No,
just for fun?
Yeah. And then as I was director of international studies, and thereafter, I think for a couple of times as vice president, I would go over and negotiate the leases for the castle.
Did you enjoy that?
Oh yeah.
Free trip. All right, I'll go over and negotiate a deal.
Yeah. Anytime you can get scones and clotted cream, you go.
Why not? It's a perk, right?
Yeah, that's right. It was good.
So Art was saying the same thing yesterday, that that international travel, being able to do that was fantastic. But you also had, we'll go back to your role as academic vice president. So you were the only one who, well, that was, I said 82, 83, 83, 84. So I think Dorothy Simpson was, I can't remember if she was appointed before or after that, but really it was you and Dorothy Simpson who was vice president for, I don't know what they call it. That it wasn't advancement,
no, it was university relations.
Relations were the only women who held a high vice president role.
Yeah, we had a woman dean back that time. Louise Johnson was the dean of liberal arts and sciences, and we had a couple that were associate VPs. like Chris Kelly
Yeah.
was associate dean.
Did you find your role as a woman in that vice presidential role? I guess eye-opening, or were you able to make some changes or awareness, or what was it like to be in that role at the time a predominantly
Yeah,
male?
there were tough times because the men, they could go in the same bathroom and decide something and the likes. That was another place with our women's group, is when we were in a meeting and we're having a little tough time on something, we'd tug our ear to help each other, and that would help.
That would help.
But again, one of the advantages that I was able to put in there with my survival was I knew the budget, and because of some of the roles that I had played with budget, I knew faculty rosters. I knew who was in what positions. I knew who was placing, and money is power.
Mm.
And if you can get through budgets, you can do a lot of things.
So you were the acting VP again in the early 90s, and then you were appointed. They had a search, and you were appointed as the permanent. Was that something that you wanted to do again? You thought, well, if I'm going to be interim,
And do the work anyway.
right?
Yeah.
And then and to be named the permanent one, was that something that you thought about doing, and it would be a good idea? I don't know.
Yeah, I had several people encourage me to do it, and so I thought, might as well put my name in there. I mean, as opposed to kind of say doing the work, but not having both title and salary that goes with that.
Right.
Yeah. And then when I was when you say I finished 5 years, that was when I had, again, good working relationships with human resources, because a lot of the back and forth of positions, etc., work with a fellow by the name of Bill Cheetah. And he came into the office one day and he said, "Barb, you're 91. Why are you still working?" I came home and said to Art, "I'm 91. I quit." And the reason that was there was because we have a rule of 90 at St. Cloud State, where your age plus the years of experience that you have. If you're 90, you can retire at full benefit. So I said, "I'm 91, I quit." I put in my papers asking for a phased retirement.
So this was when you were academic VP, or this was after you resigned?
No, it was while I was finishing my VP job.
Your VP. So you
And
because you left in June 1997 is when you left that job.
Yeah,
So
and
that's when Bill was saying, "Why are you here?"
Yeah, that was, and so 97 to 2002 or so, I was on phased retirement, and so I went part time and basically kept doing the budget stuff.
Yeah, and that's what I was unsure of, because I know, and that's why I remember when I found an article in the Chronicle that you had announced your retirement, and it says Bruce Gruby, who was president, said that you were going to take a sabbatical, and that's how I knew you had gone to Alnwick. But I wasn't sure what you had done afterwards. Yeah. I didn't realize you were on phased retirement at that time, so you were primarily dealing with the budgets.
And so.
And you retired then fully in 2002.
A year before Arthur, so that I could come home and establish eminent domain before he showed up.
How long did it take you to adjust to retirement?
A while.
A while.
When I said I was retiring, I have some friends that were kind of cliques, and the child care director said, "Barb, why don't you come over here and play grandma?" So in my phased retirement, the first 2 years, I came over and changed diapers and read books and took kids for walks and so forth and so on.
That's fantastic. I didn't know you did that.
Yeah, I was, and I won't tell you what that game. I could get in trouble. But it was really fun. It, after you've dealt with faculty that many years, to change diapers was really.
It's a change of pace, I suppose.
That was really fun.
Dealing with adults who might be acting like a baby and actually dealing with babies who are supposed to be acting like babies, yeah.
And when babies cry, they had a purpose.
I've heard you tell that joke before.
Well, it tells it like it is.
I know you do. So you were on phased retirement, you were at the daycare center, but it took you a while to, even though you were on phase, it took you a while to adjust to retirement.
Well, and retirement.
Yeah.
I miss the people.
Yeah.
You've been around people for almost 40 years and are busy with all of that. So I just had to find other things to make myself busy.
Yeah. It was funny when I was talking to Art yesterday, and I asked him the same question, and I said, so how long did it take you to adjust to retirement? He said, on the car ride home.
Yeah.
I'm like, wow, I guess that didn't take long. I guess you were ready to go.
No, it took me longer than that.
So let's talk about, just change gears here for just a minute. So you talked a little bit about Brendan McDonald, and obviously he was your boss when you were at the registrar's office. What kind of effect did he have on your career, and as well as Bob and Alice Wick as well? What influence did they have on you?
A lot.
A lot.
A lot. Both of them. They gave you good advice. They kind of hinted that you better do this or you better do that. No, they were good role models. Bob Wick, had that speech communication background, and he was smooth that way, and Art does that some too. They took debate, argumentation, persuasion. The one that Arthur didn't do very well on was effective listening. But they took these courses in which they could ease in on all of a sudden you were doing what they kind of wanted you to do in the first place. But they were able to communicate with you, and without hollering and shouting and getting, they didn't, and not just me, with everybody. They knew how to do things without putting anger into anybody.
You don't get much done when you're yelling at somebody.
No. And Sickink was that way too. Sickink was just as instrumental as and in the other areas, Bill Cheatham was very instrumental in guiding me in some things. But Wick and McDonald were there was no deceiving anybody. No, you didn't put bricks up in the road to see if you could kick them. There were people that did that set you up.
Yeah, that's awful. Mm-hmm. How was your working relationship with Bob Bess?
Good. He too was. He came seasoned, and that makes a difference when you come seasoned. And he didn't have any outside agenda. A lot of times when we hired people, again, not just president, hired people, they were looking for their next step. I'm dean today. When am I going to be vice president? Or I'm president at St. Cloud State. When am I going to be president at Harvard? And so they were doing things with the calculation of where it gave them their next step. Bob Bess just came in and, he knew what he had done. Yeah. Same with McDonald and Wick. The advantages for some of them was that they knew the institution from having worked here. Some of the people that we hired they had to look on the road map to see where Minnesota was. And so they didn't have that same loyalty to make it go because they knew where they were going next.
And because Bob, he was retired from the California state system, right?
Yes.
How did they even find him? You know, that's what always struck me is McDonald suddenly resigns, and you were called what, the chief executive officer for like 6 weeks.
Oh, along with that, the whole summer I got to sit in the desk.
Sit in the desk.
I even signed a few papers.
Oh, I didn't know that, Barb. So you were obviously you were running campus for a few months, and I always wondered why they brought in someone from the outside and why they didn't name someone else as acting. Like, I don't know if you're like, well, I could do this, or you're like, well, no, somebody else should come in and do this. What was the thinking of that?
Well, I think the police was in such turmoil at that time with that they just felt that they needed outside, advice. I don't want to use the word consultant because they were not consultants, but we were in a state of unrest.
Because the faculty gave a vote of no confidence to McDonald. I don't know how often that happens, and maybe presidents, I don't know if they shrug that sort of thing off. I don't know, but I know that, and he was ill as well. And did you know Brendan was ill at the time or not?
Suspected.
You had suspected. Mm-hmm. So they wanted to bring an outside person and
just settled it down.
And he was.
It was the time to settle it. I couldn't have settled it because they were mad at the world.
Yeah.
And when you're mad at the world, things just don't work.
Yeah. How did you think? Did you think he did a good job? I mean, obviously you were here the whole time. And plus
I worked well with him, and he was willing. It sounds like you want to try to shrug your duties, but he was willing to stand up and say A and B, and we can do C and D, and to negotiate, but also see the sides of individuals and where they were coming from.
Yeah.
So when we went to meet and confer, it was never, I shouldn't say never, but it was not as combative as it had been in other situations.
And you suspect it was because of a different person?
The personality that he was. Mm-hmm.
Interesting. Well, at least you can say that I didn't know you sat at the desk, Barb. Signed some things. You were the boss for a little while. Is there anything else that you want to talk about? As I'm trying to, I'm looking at my notes. Is there anything else, Barb, that you want to discuss that we've missed or that you feel is important to communicate?
One of the other things that we don't, again, I think, do as good a job on as we should, is being involved in the community. If you kind of say, look down the row and the likes, how many of our administrators in particular are active in the community, attend events, even with the raising funds and so forth. We struggle with that.
You were involved. Was it March of Dimes you were involved with, or was it something else when you were?
I was in United Way.
That's what it was.
United
Way.
Catholic Charities, the hospital, and now I'm with the monastery. When I was done with St. Benedict's community, I put in my sentence there of 12 years. One of the nuns said to me, "What are you going to do now, Barb?" And I didn't have an answer. And I don't know if you're acquainted at all with the Catholic Church and the nuns, but if you don't have an answer, they give you one. And so I said, I don't know. I want to do something where where I don't have to be nice to people. So I then began to bake cookies and do laundry. Works well. To this day, I'm baking cookies, and they like it. But the whole mission of the university, though, to be involved in the community, even attending events, how many faculty and staff do you see go to the Mabel or the whatever, and it's hard.
Yeah.
And,
do you think it's just a culture shift, or is it, or
No,
the
I
excuse
think
that
this
people are too busy, or it's just people just don't want to do it?
This is way back.
I see.
This has been, and yet you go, to functions, and there are certain businesses and industries and so forth that you see at everything, and that are chairs of things and so forth. And I think part of that comes from the institution again itself, not just the individuals. How many things do we sponsor, and how much do you see St. Ben's and St. John's in the community?
A lot.
More so than St. Cloud?
Yeah.
Yeah. What? You wanted to know?
Is there anything else, Barb? I know I'm sounding like some tea. Is there anything else you want to say?
No.
But anything else
No.
that we've missed that you feel is something that you want to say? You're good.
I'm ready to retire.
Well, you have done a lot for this university as a student, as an employee, and going all the way to the chief executive officer
For 6 days.
6 days or whatever that was before Bob Bess arrived on campus in the summer of 1992. So if you haven't heard it from somebody else, and I'm sure you have, I want to thank you, Barb, for your service to this university and the roles that you have played here. And I think it's really important, and that's why one of the reasons why I wanted to talk to you is being one of those people who've been around a really long time, done a lot of different things, and I think your impact is tremendous. So thank you very much.
Well, thank you for the compliments. I'll go back to working for nothing instead of 75 cents an hour.
And industrial arts. That is so. You work all the way from industrial arts as a support person, and then 40 years later, you're the academic vice president, which I think is absolutely fantastic. So I appreciate your time today, Barb. Thank you for speaking to me, and thank you very much.
And what do I say? Don't hold any of this against me, and don't submit it as evidence.
No. This is all for historic purposes. So if they want to know what Barb Grachek thought in 2017, they can listen to this oral history interview. So Thank you very much, Barb.
Thank you.
I appreciate it.
Thank you.